Hi everyone, and welcome to this new bonus lesson for volume 4. And I prepared really something interesting for you to take a look at. And this setup was really considered to be impossible to do without the use of programming. But I actually found a way to do this setup with the help of MoGraph and Espresso. Now, as you probably already guessed, we are going to build a Slinky setup, and creating a simple Slinky with one single motion, it's rather easy. You can use a spline wrap for that, but if you want to create a continuous motion for that Slinky, that's a little bit more elaborate, especially if you want to control the orientation and the path of that same Slinky. So let's not waste any time and dive into it immediately. So if I want to mimic some sort of a Slinky motion, I actually created this spline, these two splines actually prior to recording, simply because I wanted to cut down the tutorial time to some reasonable amount. So I will take this helix spline, which will act as my Slinky, and I will wrap it on this arc. That's the start of the setup. So let's find that spline wrap and put it as a child of a helix spline. Now there are probably many ways you could go with this setup, but actually the spline wrap is pretty much the most simplest way. So let's build what is obvious and we will continue from there. So I'll drop this arc spline inside, and now we'll get some really bad results, but we will fix that by changing the orientation, and should be one of the y. So let's try y plus, and now we have a Slinky in its most extended form. Now bear in mind that this bonus lesson is a part of advanced volumes. I really don't want to spend time explaining each and every step, but I also don't want you to miss some really important things, because in advanced setups, a tiny setting that you may miss or something similar or wrong orientation of the axis can mean all the difference for the complete setup. So what I want here is I want to create one animated step of this Slinky. So if I put this to 0%, then the Slinky will actually be gone because of this spline settings here, because of this mode and end mode. And if I'm aiming to somewhat realistic look, then I will have to offset these guys a little bit. So let's say that 10 here is our starting position, and it would extend to 100%, then it would go all the way here to 90%. So they're at the same size at the end. So we will have to manually animate that. So let's do just that. Let's enter 10 here, and we will decide in what time span we want that complete action to happen. Here you will have to use your artistic sense and sense for timing. So let's say I find the reasonable timing to be 60 frames for the complete motion. So the first 30 frames it would stretch completely, and in next 30 to 60 frames it would go into its default position, so to speak. So I have to keyframe that manually. So let's do it like this. I will control click on 0 on frame 0, drag this to frame 30, and simply keyframe the offset at 100%. Now this guy here should be 0 in both 30 and 0, so we don't want any interpolation to happen between 0 and 30 if we add a keyframe for this value here at 100%. I really hope I haven't lost anyone, so I will add a 0% keyframe here and also here. So let's give it a shot and see what we have. So now we have a, let's say, a half of our cycle made. We will now create another cycle. So let's go to frame 30. You see it's set to 0. And now the second part of the motion will be 100% or actually 90% because we don't want to lose that Slinky, figuratively speaking. And I will keyframe this 90%. So effectively, if I press play now, we have really somewhat of logical and natural motion. This was pretty much the easy part of the tutorial. Now I will do something that will maybe seem a little bit illogical, but let me explain. I will mark these two guys like this, so, and I will right click and go animation show track, and that will show me the animated tracks of those values. I will switch to curve mode, select both of these guys, and I will select all the keys now. And the reason for this is because I want to change the interpolation from this curvy one with easing in and out to linear. And here under key, I will change the type to linear. And I did it because I don't want to have any interpolation between these values here and here at the end of the splice, because I will have to do some sort of timing later, and if I will leave this to be interpolated in a soft manner, then I will have some sort of irregular movement across that slider. So effectively speaking, the Slinky will move a little bit slower, then faster, then it will again slow down. I don't want it. I want a completely linear movement with same constant speed. I hope that makes sense, and you will see later why. So now we have one continuous cycle, and if we want to create really a repetitious continuous motion of this Slinky, then the logical next step is to clone it. So let's actually group all these guys and put them under cloner like this. And let's go in another direction. Let's say maybe 10 clones, and we will spread them apart equally, something like this. So let's try maybe 118. It really doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be decent enough. Let me show you an issue with this immediately. So if I press play, watch what happens. Well, we have 10 Slinkies. That is really funny if you're aiming for that look, but we actually want one Slinky to follow these splines that are cloned. Before we tackle that problem, I will just change here under transform tab of the cloner to some color, maybe like this, so we have much more vivid representation of those Slinky guys. So how do we create a single guy or an illusion of a single guy? Well, the logical step here would be to use a step effector. So this setup is really a result of trial and error, and I really am trying to streamline the process, especially the thinking process about how to approach things. You really don't have to create everything to be real. It can be fake. You can cheat without a problem. If it leads to pleasing results, then you can cheat without a problem. So now, since I have an animated value here, by using this time offset, I can offset the animation of this clone. So let's try maybe with, let's go with 100 and see how that works. And there we go. We have some sort of an offset between those guys. Let me stop this, go back. And if you want to figure out the exact value here, that is actually quite simple, and we'll certainly see how useful it is to use round numbers in Cine 4D, especially for these types of setups. So here I have 10 clones and I have 60 frames of action for each of these guys. That would imply 10 times more action time for proper offset. So 10 times 60 is 600. So let's enter 600 here, press play, and there will be a slight surprise here, and you will wonder why is this happening. And before that, I'll just increase this time to 300 maybe, like this, and expand to full time so we have more time. And notice that the offset isn't correct. The reason for this is this spline here. So if I just reset this spline, I will get a linear interpolation, and this will also explain what I was doing before for these two guys on their animated track. So I want clean, linear 0 to 100 interpolation with constant speed or constant moment. That is really important and can mean a world of difference in setup. So now we have a bunch of slinkies here, and the real problem is, even though one is figuratively speaking animating, if we do a render, we actually will not see that spline rendered. For that to happen, you have to have this hair render enabled. So now if you do a preview render, you can see it renders those guys, and it renders this original helix spline. I can pull it downwards because we actually will not use it at all. If I press play a bit and stop at this frame, you can see it renders all these guys, and I really don't have any means to disable rendering of all these guys. If I disable this helix spline like this, both in viewport and render, nothing will render. So I don't have any means via this render settings to isolate this single slinky. So that's a pretty big problem, but we will solve this, and we will solve this by using a simple effector. So let's load a plane effector, and homograph is really powerful, and once you get the grips around these generators and effectors, then the completely new world opens up, especially if you know your way around expressor. So I will disable this position, and I only want to use this visibility, guys. So I will enable the fall off, so box fall off, and for the size of that fall off, I will use half of this number, and the reason for that is here under fall off for plane effector, if I enter here the complete size of that object, then actually I will get double of its actual value, because it's calculated from the center in both directions. I hope that makes sense. So 119 divided by 2. So let's divide that by 2 here, and we will get a value of 59.5. So we can actually go with 59, round number, and now I have the exact size which corresponds to distance between each clone position. So these are the clone positions, these little dots here. Now I did this because I want to have only single clone visible at every moment. So here my plane effector is loaded, and if I enable visibility option here, well, nothing will happen. Even if I do this inversion here, and if you remember correctly from previous lessons, for this effector to work in this manner, you have to change this maximum and minimum value. So maximum should be 0, and minimum should be 100. Now this visibility guy will work. Let me now show you what I meant by this size of the plane effector. If I press play and set my effector to be inverted, so everything outside this box will be invisible and really fake this effect of one Slinky, but I have to be really precise. You see, I'm trying to find it manually and it really doesn't work. So that is the reason for the size of this box. I want to have this guy covering exactly the length between the clones. That way I'm sure it won't show two of them at the same time. That really defeats the purpose. Now, how do I map this time, this cycle of time, to this constellation of clones? So this is a little bit problematic, and now we'll actually create a tracer object, and first I will uncheck this visibility, so I have all the clones accessible and visible. I can even hide this arc, it's not really necessary, so I think you will be able to see some things more clearly. So now we just have to get rid of these guys that are not animated. So let me stop this, go back. Let's create that tracer because I want to create a spline that will connect all these clone positions. So let's go MoGraph, tracer, and we will uncheck these trace vertices and we will connect all objects, and you will see a spline forming here. So now if I add a line to spline tag to my plane effector and simply drop this newly formed spline, tracer is actually just a spline, so think of it that way. With this position value I can simply move it properly according to my animation time. So if everything happens in 60 frames for one of these guys and the offset is set to 600, then from 0 to 600 we would have 100% value, and if we have 300 we would actually have 50% of movement. So let's actually try that with 0 at 0 and at the end 50%, and let's see how that works, if that makes sense. So if we hit play, then this is the result we will have. Now actually this will be a little bit difficult to explain, because if I check the visibility here, if I turn on the visibility, then actually the spline will be gone and this guy won't move at all because it has nothing to move on to. But really trust me when I tell you that when this action of each of these guys is over, that only single clone is affected by it. So if we scrub slowly like this, let's say to frame 60, that is the end of the action for this guy. Now as soon as I go a frame further, this guy, this first clone, is not affected anymore. The second guy is affected. So I really hope that makes sense. You see, after frame 120 till it passes on to another guy. So let's see how will that work in our setup later. Maybe we are wrong, but we cannot know until we try. Now we are halfway there. We only need a way for this spline to be active and visible, so this plane effector has something to align to while this visibility is checked. I really hope this doesn't sound too complicated, and it would possibly mean that you can do something like that with inheritance effector. So let's create a dummy matrix object. Let me show you what I mean. So maybe I want this tracer not to trace the cloner. I want it to trace the matrix, and I want this matrix to inherit every setting from this cloner, and that would mean it would inherit all the clone count and positions and distances, so it would effectively trace the same spline. So let's give it a shot. Let's load an inheritance effector for that matrix, and in this inheritance we will inherit from cloner, we will morph the motion object completely, and you can see now this matrix guy completely assumed everything from this cloner. But the problem is it also assumed that once you enable this plane effector's visibility, the spline won't be visible. So if I uncheck this, the spline will be visible. So let me just show you this. Now the tracer is tracing, and if we go to our inheritance effector under effector, you can see that as soon as I reach 100% value, that spline is gone. Otherwise, if you would hit play, but we will enable this visibility, you see it's not moving because this spline is no longer here. This spline is simply not generated because this plane effector hides the clone from which this inheritance effector inherits position information from this clone, so it really cannot generate something that way. Let me just prove my point. So now it doesn't work, but as soon as the clones are visible, the spline is generated and the clones are there. So that's quite a big problem. I will also delete this position track because I really want to have a clean start once I try to drive this by Espresso. And as I showed you, this inheritance effector really won't work. Now we have a completely different spline simply because this matrix is traced from the matrices it generates by setting here. But there is a little trick we can use. I will create a null object that we will call Espresso, just to have a placeholder for our Espresso tag. I'm adding an Espresso tag. I will collapse this too, so we have a little bit more space to work. And even though I cannot do anything with inheritance effector, I can make this matrix guy inherit directly from the cloner via Espresso, but only the settings that are actually needed. So I will drop the cloner here, and I will also drop the matrix object here and extract only the relevant data for creation of that spline we need. Let's first establish what is the relevant information we want to transfer, and that is in this case count and this x value, and we will get completely the same result. So let's find count here. So object properties count, and here also we will find that I think I will pull this up so we are just able to see those values I'm extracting. So now object properties under p position x, we will extract the same values here. So here under object properties count, and also transform p x, and I will connect the two, but I will scale this window a little bit down like this, and watch what happens. I'll probably have to hit play to refresh something, and this matrix guy is still in this grid array mode, and we will put the same mode as here. So linear, let's go to linear mode, and if I hit play, I also have to get rid of this value here, and seems that there is something not connected properly, because this position x value is not receiving the proper data. And I think the issue is in this plane effector. So let's disable it for a moment. So here we're receiving the proper clone count, and let's see if we are receiving the proper x value here. And we are not, maybe I extracted the wrong value. Let's try once again. So let's find that object properties, p x, and connect the two. And we should have 10 matrices here. Let's press play and refresh the scene, and here we go. So some things really need a tiny bit more of attention to refresh and to be taken into account. I really hope that you're still following this. And now let me just enable this cloner. So now, even though I can enable this plane effector, I won't lose my spline, even though this visibility is checked. So now, if I will play with this align to spline position, I will actually find where that animation is actually occurring. So let's try at the very start, like this. And here it is happening, and I can really try to find it and fiddle around manually, but I think the better way to do this is actually to leave it to Espresso to calculate this position based on some parameters. So let's go back and put this to 0, and we'll create that setup. Here we will run into few problems. The first problem is you would probably want to change the clone count at some point. Maybe you will want to change the orientation, maybe the curvature. So let's say maybe here under clone or something like this. And let's actually transfer this value also. So let's find that step rotation here, and I just slightly pull this upwards so we have more space, and let's find that value. So step rotation h, so you can see the value I'm extracting, and let's find that value here. So the step rotation h, and we will connect these guys also, because I really want to show you how that transfer works inside Espresso. So now, if I will play with this value here, my matrix object here follows. So simple as that. So you can have some sort of additional controls that way. Let me collapse this doodle palette. And as I was saying earlier, there is a little bit of a problem here. How you will tell this plane effector to move along that spline in regard to clone count and in regard to other settings. So that's a little bit problematic, and I think the best solution, and here I don't mean mathematically correct solution, rather a solution that is by far easiest to understand and offer some sort of a control, is a minimal mathematical operation here. So what I want here is a simple expression whereby the passing of time will tell this guy to move along this spline according to certain speed. So let's give it a shot like this, and I will create a time node, and I actually have to pull this quite up because I really cannot show you this value. See here, time. So this is the time node, and with progression of time, I want to create a simple mathematical operation. So math node, really adding the nodes in a logical manner. And of course, I want to access this position information because I want this guy to move. I hope we can work this way. You're able to see this. So I want to drop this align to spline tag here and find this position value. So I have to connect that in some sort of a logical manner. Also, we don't want to forget this, we want the clone count to play the role here. So you want to include that in calculation, otherwise you will have faulty results. We also miss a node that can map one value to another value, and that is the range mapper node. So I'm extracting that node, and what I want to map is the clone count to 0 to 100% of this position value here. So here, since this matrix object is simply inheriting the values from the cloner, I can use this count here or count on the cloner. It really doesn't matter, but just for the sake of neatness. Now, the maximum input upper value, so that's the maximum value, that should be the value that equals the clone count. So let's put input upper here and connect the clone count, and automatically in the node this guy will disappear, simply because now it is controlled with this count value here. Now I know this may seem a little bit complicated, and it actually is, but there is really no other way to achieve such results without the use of some complex interaction of these MoGraph elements and Espresso. And I think this is as complicated as I will go in my training series. I think more than this would actually be applicable only to a minimum amount of viewers, and I really don't want to do that. I really want to bring all this closer to a general user, to a regular user. So let's finish our expression here. So now I will control that mapping with time. So time will be the trigger for this operation. So let's see what happens. And now I will unhide my cloner, and you see we have some sort of a result, but it's not really correct. Something happens after, and it really doesn't have time to complete the operation. We have to adjust it with this math node, and this math node is here purely for the sake of controlling the speed of this guy. So I will break this connection here and connect it to this math node, and inside math node I want to use multiplication. So let's connect this output to input of the range mapper like this. Now this is set to 0, so no movement will be produced, but as soon as you change this to 1, you will see this guy moving, and actually this fall off can be set to 0, so we have a 0 fall off, and you see this guy is somewhat faster than this animation is occurring. So let's tune this down to maybe 0.5 and see how that works. So apparently this may seem a little bit awkward, but this setup is correct. The problem, the initial problem, is in the fact that this guy, let me just doodle that for you, this guy should be initially here, so it should cover this area exactly and then move according to this setup, because the influence is not correct on the start. So let me get rid of this doodle guy, and really hope this is not too complicated, but it will give you a glimpse, an insight how actually programming works. This is quite similar to programming, because you solve one problem and 10 other problems pop up. So actually I will substitute this object by a null, and I can go to character menu and convert to null. So I will get a null object exactly on the position of this guy. I can create a standard controller via my simple script I made in volume 3. And now I want to offset this plane effector by exactly this value of the fall off, so it covers this complete area, and this side will be touching this current axis position. So let me fold this and open coordinates manager, and since this is the plus direction, I have to enter negative 59 if I wanted to go this way. So let's go minus 59, and nothing will happen because it is aligned to spline. Let's transfer this tag to our null and now enter minus 59. So this should be it. So now I will make this plane effector a child of the plane null we created, and by pressing play we should have a decent behavior. So how about that? This is really cool. You can play around now with these settings, so maybe turn the spline a little bit in this direction, and if you will have problems popping up and similar, then you have to enable this option, this tangential, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and you have to find the correct axis, because you see some things are not really working as expected. So let's try Y. That should be correct. Maybe we could hide the path, we could hide the effector here like this, so we don't see that box, and we only have our Slinky. We can even hide this tracer. So how about that? This is as far as you can go without programming this manually. I also have to point out that for creating a bulletproof Slinky setup, you really want to code it from zero, but this is a really good trick. MoGraph can make tricks that are actually pretty much impossible to get in other packages, so that is why it is so powerful, and I think this is a pretty believable Slinky. What you can also do, you can control this arc spline maybe by simply playing with these points, and that Slinky will obey that. You can see that here, and here is the reason why I hit that arc spline. I really hope you enjoyed this setup, because this setup can be greatly expanded and connected in bulletproof setup if we would set up this motion here by this new C motion guy, and I'm slowly building a C motion and animation related volume that will be really good and will be an eye opener for many things. So let's leave it at that, and I hope